Hey everybody, it's Saturday afternoon and I want to do a spur of the moment round the world update here. I feel like it's been a while since I've done one, so while I'm thinking about it, we'll go ahead and do it. So again, this is going to be spur of the moment, not a lot of preparation, so hopefully I won't miss anything. I've been standing here for a moment trying to think of anything going on here in my 29 miscellaneous, and there just really isn't any. The last thing I did to this tank was a basic water change and filter change about a week ago, and I can already use a little bit of a top off. You can see the water levels getting down there a little bit, but other than that, nothing really going on in this tank. I recently removed the Angelfish from here. I had the big one, and then I had this smaller size one over here, although this one's still pretty significant in its own right. But I separated them because they were getting a little aggressive. The big one was getting a little too big, and it wound up over here in my 55-gallon Gourami tank, and I'm really glad I made the switch because that just looks fantastic in here, and that's an awful lot of angelfish for being in a little 29-gallon tank. So that worked out really well. And then of course, now that we are looking at my Gourami tank, this tank is the one, in addition to my Waterfall tank, that has gotten the most attention this week. I've been really hoping that this whiptail catfish would cooperate and stay still for us long enough to get over here and actually get some good, reasonably close video of it. It is just a really, really cool looking fish. Initially, I thought that it should have longer filaments on its tail fin, but I've looked at lots and lots of pictures of other similar catfish and same species, and they all basically look like that. They don't have these real long whip-like filaments like I was sort of expecting. So I don't think this catfish is having its tail nipped on at all. I think it's doing just fine in there, and it's a really, really cool catfish. I really enjoy it. It does move around the tank fairly often. I see it, you know, right now we can see it up on the spray bar. I see it hanging on the glass quite often. It will get up on the plants and lay up in the leaves. I'll see it hanging off the Java fern occasionally. So really enjoy the whiptail catfish. What I've done to this tank this week was my ChemiClean aquarium treatment. I'd done one of those recently, and then I had an explosion of hair algae afterwards. And so I still felt like I had a lot of grunge going on in the tank, and so we did another treatment with the ChemiClean. And I just finished that off last night. I did a big water change. I sprayed some hydrogen peroxide down in there. I'll attach a card. I don't want to get into talking a lot about hydrogen peroxide at the moment. I discussed it a little bit in the video I shot, so if you want to check that out, you can look at the card I attached. But otherwise, it looks like I had a modicum of success at least. You can see where a lot of this stuff looks like it's a cross between dead, sort of off-wax type growth and growing algae. So I'm not really sure what's going to play out in the long run for that, how much it's going to grow back or how aggressively it's going to grow back. I have been putting less algae wafers in the tank, and I even got in there and wiped down a lot of the algae that was growing on the glass in hopes that if I can get enough of it beaten back, then the algae eating fish and the off-wax grazing fish, like that royal pleco, that whiptail catfish we just looked at. I'm sorry, it's not a royal pleco, it's a royal whiptail. They are Luriacaridae, but they are not actual plecos. They're just in the same family. But that's an off-wax grazer. I've got a rubber lip pleco in here. I think I've got a clown pleco in here, but I'm not certain about that. I haven't seen that one in quite a while, but I have seen the rubber lip, and I do have a hillstream loach, both of which are off-wax grazing fish. So if I can get that, you know, scum removed enough that we can expose some of this good algae, then we can maybe get those fish eating it, and if they stay on top of it, maybe the tank will stay a little bit cleaner. This rock is a good example. You can see how sort of dead looking all that stuff is. So I don't know if I should get in there with a brush and scrub away at that a little bit. My little Gourami came over to say hello. So I don't know whether I should get in with the brush and scrub away on these rocks, or just leave it alone and let the fish, you know, graze on it by themselves, and maybe they'll clear it up by themselves. Sorry, I'm having issues getting my focus worked out there. So like I said, that's the tank we've done the most work on this week, so that's probably the most I had to talk about. I think we're going to skip the Waterfall tank altogether this week. Right now we're going to look at my T-bar tank, 55 gallon. I think we're going to skip the Waterfall tank in this video and just do a separate update on the Waterfall. I feel like I could do a 25-minute video just talking about that by itself. So my T-bar tank, everything is going nicely. I did remove a little bit of chunks of Anubias for a few viewers the other day. I do sell my aquatic plants when I have them available. I'll put my email down below if you're interested. You can contact me and we can discuss what I've got available and that sort of thing. So I removed a little bit of the Anubias, and I've been trying to stay on top of the water changes. You can see I'm getting a little bit of the pleco poop building up in the bottom there, but not too much. I've had somebody in there burrowing out and digging out, probably the T-bar right there. And so the issues I was having with the T-bar, having sort of hole in the head disease or whatever that was, those issues seem to have gone away. I haven't really had any problems with them since. I do need to get in this tank and do some maintenance. You can probably see some dead Java fronds in there. You can see some more over here. I really need to get in there and just groom them out. Got a bunch of them over here. Wow, now that I'm looking at it, I really do need to get in there and do a water change and clean some of these dead leaves out of there. And it also looks like the front glass could use a decent wipe down. Not going to complain about that either. So that's really all that's going on in the T-bar tank. Again, not a lot going on this week all around the fish room. Just been working on my Gourami tank and then, of course, working on my Waterfall. I'm always working on that. So this is my Black Ghost and Knifefish tank. It is a 40 breeder. It's fairly heavily planted, and it's chock full of fish. They're just hard to see. You got to get your eye in before you start noticing them all over the place. I've got Rasbora hets in here. I've got a lot of little glow light tetras. I've got red serpe tetras. Of course, I've got these beautiful, brilliant little neon rainbow fish. They do school together sometimes, but they also feel so safe and secure in such a heavily planted tank with no predators that they do spread out a lot too, and so you don't always see that really neat shoaling behavior with these fish. And when you do get to see that, it's really, really pretty. Let me slide my light fixture forward here, and it'll put a little more light on these fish, and you can see that color pop a little more. So I think this bigger one here is the original one. I got some fish from one of my viewers, and I think that's the one that I got, which more or less inspired me to go ahead and get a larger school of them. I wound up buying 6 more, so we now have 7 of them in the tank. I didn't lose any when I purchased them. And then, of course, I also recently added my Crenocicla regani here, my little dwarf pike cichlid, which is just an amazing little fish. Love the little dwarf pike cichlids. And every now and again, we'll get a little glimpse of my Black Ghost knifefish wiggling around in its cave back there. But very, very reclusive fish. I very, very seldom ever even see it. So this is his tank, but we seldom see it. And then I don't know if you can make them out in the back there. I've got some peppered cories in this tank too. They're always just palling around, swimming around on the bottom. I have 2 or 3 of them in here. Looks like I got some males and females. Some of them are big and plump, and then some of them are a little more small and thin. So I'm assuming that's the males and females respectively. Or no, I guess I got that backwards. That would have been the females and males respectively. Anyway, that is my Black Ghost knifefish tank. Now we're going to move on and have a look at my 125 gallon native tank. I could spend a while talking about this tank, but it would be pure speculation. You know, we can chat about what I'd like to do to it and what plans I'm thinking about having for the future and so on and so forth. But honestly, it's not really worth having that conversation now. I chat about it here and there in other videos, and we will talk about it from time to time. But for the most part, we're not doing anything for this tank till next spring anyway, and that's even if I decide to do anything to it then. There's no guarantee that I won't decide that I just like this tank the way it is by springtime, and this is the way it'll stay. So again, not a lot to talk about, not a lot going on in this tank, but I figure I'll give everybody a little bit of a look at it before we move on. I will also say I've not seen my crayfish in here since the last video I did, where I very excitedly showed everybody my crayfish because it was out and about, making an appearance, getting some dinner. and I've not seen hide nor hair of it since, even though they don't really have hides or hairs, but you get my meaning. So I don't know where it is. I don't know if it's even still in there. I've not seen bits of shell or legs strewn about the place. Usually if the creek chubs get to one, you will see, well, you'll just see evidence of it. You'll see little bits of pieces of crayfish all spread out all over the place and little bits of it floating around the tank. They tear them to shreds when they get a hold of them. So I think he's probably still safe, and it probably is just a matter of it happened to be a really reclusive crayfish, and because of that it stays hidden all the time and therefore is still alive in the tank, whereas the creek chubs long ago killed and ate all the other ones, because this creek chub right here is a fairly significant fish. I mean, that, you know, he's that big around. So if that fish wants to eat a crayfish, it eats a crayfish. So like I said, we'll have to see what goes on in this tank. Nothing's really changed. I haven't done anything other than some water changes in this. I did bring the total dissolved solids down. If you haven't watched any videos since then, I did have very high total dissolved solids in this tank. They were over 1,000 parts per million. I still do want to talk about that. Not really sure where those high numbers came from. But we do want to have a conversation about that. But I've done several water changes on that, and I did get the total dissolved solids down below 400 parts per million. I don't know what they're back up to now, but several days ago they were down to about 378 parts per million. So we'll see if we can't keep it a little more under control. This is a very heavily stocked tank with a lot of woodwork in it. I mean, I've got downright logs in this tank. You could build a campfire out of what I've got in this tank. And so, of course, that's leaching tannins and everything else into the tank all the time. So the total dissolved solids in this tank skyrocket. So I don't know what they are now, but I did get them down to a little more reasonable number with a series of water changes last week. So moving on, no point talking about my snail tank. It's just got a bunch of snails in it. The little shrimp are still living in there, and everything is the same in there. I just use that to feed my figure 8 puffer butterbean diet of snails. This is another 40 breeder I've got. This is my purple spotted gudgeon tank. And basically nothing really to talk about in this one either. Just same old, same old. There's my purple spotted gudgeon hiding up in the corner. Well, he's not hiding. He's just kind of laying in there. It's dark enough in this tank because of the garbage lighting I have on here that he doesn't have to hide. He can just sit out in plain sight and he still feels nice and secure because it's a very, very dimly lit tank. There, he's going to give us a little look at him. I was hoping he'd swim around a little bit. Of course, he's not swimming under the light. It looks like the forward lighting fixture on here is just gone out completely. It's not even working anymore. So the tank is only lit from the back portion at this point now. There we go. Let me see if I push on that one spot and get that lights to light again. Well, I guess not. The lighting on this tank is just absolute garbage. It's the little strip LEDs. I don't know if you can see those little flickers and flashes in there, but it's these little strip LEDs. You can see it's kind of lit, but not really. And then I more or less, they're sticky backed and you can put them like under shelving or whatever. And I just basically have stuck them on a piece of foam board, and I've got them a piece in the front and a piece in the back, and that is the grand total of the lighting that goes on this tank, and it's not very much and it's not very good. So one of these days I'll get around to changing the lighting on this tank, but at the same time nothing ever happens in this tank, and that's certainly enough lighting to keep all these low light plants in there growing and doing well enough. I am getting some diatom algae growing in there, all that brown algae, not sure what that's all about. But this is just such a low maintenance tank. That diatom algae is probably a result of the garbage light I have on it. So at some point we'll get around to doing something with this tank, but in the meantime it's just, you know, just does kind of nothing. It just sits here. Again, this purple spotted gudgeon is a very interesting fish in one sense, but it is just such a boring fish in another. I really wish I was getting a better look at it. I can see it just fine, but as the camera tries to adjust for the lighting and I try to angle to avoid the glare, it makes it harder and harder to see. Let me see if I lift the lid again and if that'll change the lighting for us a little. Well, that certainly got him moving around and startled him. So there's a look at his face. And now he's just going to hide in the back corner there for a while. So once again, this is more like an aquatic garden that happens to have a couple of fish swimming around in it. I also have a highly reclusive bumblebee catfish in here, and then I have a rubber lip pleco that every time it makes an appearance, the purple spotted gudgeon back there tries to eat it. So it basically stays hidden underneath the rocks all the time too. So again, not a lot going on in this tank. So moving on to my 125 gallon tank. We can no longer stand right in front of it because of my waterfall, but we can come out here and kind of look at it from this angle and see most of the tank all in one go. So you can probably tell it's looking a little dimly lit, especially off to the left there. That is mainly due to the huge amount of growth I'm getting from my water sprite in there. Now I would imagine that this water sprite probably has a lot of that green slimy growth on it, and as such I won't use this for sale. But if it's not, if it's good, you know, algae's one thing, but that green slimy cyanobacteria is another altogether. If I've got that growing on plants, I just throw them away. So we'll have to look around, but you can see, I mean, it's a dense mat of plants. I'll get in there and I'll probably sort out a few dozen, decent sized plants, and you can see right there all those root masses. I've got several full-size plants right there, so when I do my next water change, I'll probably leave one or two of those large plants, and then all of that stuff will come out. So once again, if you're interested in water sprite or java fern, I've always got lots of that, or I usually have lots of that, and if not, it doesn't take me very long to accumulate some of it and have it available. So you can check out my email down below again if you're interested in the aquatic plants. So other than that, I don't have much going on in here that I can think of. I did lose another one of these little rainbow fish. I'm down to that one last little rainbow fish. I came in one morning and it was just dead on the bottom. No idea why. Probably jumped and, banged its head in the glass and killed it. That's not that uncommon. The other day I turned the lights on and my T-bar cichlid that we were just looking at a little while ago freaked out so bad. It literally banged and thumped. It knocked the space heater, the tank heater, off of its suction cup, and then crashed into the end of the tank so loud I double checked to make sure it didn't knock itself out cold or kill itself. And of course it had a couple of little scrapes down its side where it had scratched against a piece of wood. So fish will injure and even kill themselves simply by being startled in the tank, and that can happen when you're not even in the room. Another fish comes up and spooks it or nips at it or something, and it's, it was half asleep and it just dashes away. Well, if there's a rock right in front of it when it dashes, then, it bashes right into that rock. So that kind of stuff does happen, and you do lose fish over that sometimes, or you'll have injured fish because of it. Can't see it in this video here. Let's see if we can pull it out. There we go. Got a tiger lily that needs to get cut, because that's definitely floating on the surface now. And once you get one runner that gets up and makes it to the surface, every runner after that will attempt to go to the surface. So you can see I've got some new growth going on down here, and it looks like I got some nice green growth going on back there. Not exactly sure what that is, probably java, but that's some nice green new growth going on back there too. This is another tank that I've had sort of an explosion of the algae, and it's this fuzzy green hair algae. That's all a kind of java fern, yet it's not growing like java fern because it's covered in that algae. Not sure why. You can even see how sort of green and fuzzy the rocks look. It's all covered in that long flowing algae. Fortunately, I do have algae eating fish in this tank that will take care of the rocks and the glass to a small degree, but there's only so much they can do by keeping the leaves of every single plant clean. Maybe this is another tank that I should cut back on how many algae wafers I throw in there every day, and then force the fish to sort of rely on the natural supply of algae that's in the tank a little more. So this tank's due for a water change, a little bit of maintenance. It's not behind schedule or anything. It's just, it's ready. It needs to get the glass wiped down. I need to get in there and thin those plants out. It's just way too dark. You can barely see the colors of the fish anymore. So just time for a little basic maintenance on my 125. My 20-gallon Angelfish tank here is still looking a little cloudy. I don't know why. I got in there recently and I did a little rooting around. I made a few changes. Basically just involved moving the pieces of woodwork around a little bit so you could see them a little more prominently. And I gravel vacked. I removed a bunch of mulm and dead, nasty, gross stuff out of there. And you would think that that would have made the tank look nicer. But ever since I did that work, we've had this sort of cloudy haze in the water. And it doesn't look to me like it's suspended debris. It doesn't look like it's, you know, messy in the way you would get if you got in there with your gravel vac and stirred the tank up. It looks more like cloudy, you know, not muddy, but cloudy. And cloudy water comes from bacterial infections, or, you know, sometimes when your nitrogen cycle's not up to snuff, you'll see the cloudiness in the water. I don't know what causes the cloudiness in the water when you start getting nitrites building up, but when you're cycling your tank and you begin to see the nitrites building up, you will notice your tank will start to get cloudy, and then eventually as it goes through that phase and clears up, you're pretty much getting towards, you know, your tank is fully cycled in and ready to go. So I'm not sure what causes that cloudiness during that nitrite rich point of the cycle, but if you knock your tank out of whack and you get your nitrogen cycle out of whack and you start getting a little bit of nitrites building up in the tank, your tank will often get cloudy again. And so I was worried about that, but my nitrites are fine, my ammonia's fine, everything's normal in the tank. It's just got this slightly cloudy water to it that I just don't know what's causing it. And it's been, you know, more than a week now, so it's long enough that if it was the nitrogen cycle, it would have recycled back in by this point. You know, I didn't do anything dramatic to it, so it only would have sort of knocked it out of whack ever so slightly if I had done anything to it at all. So again, not really sure what's going on with the tank. No casualties, no fish losses, nobody's looking distressed or anything else, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. Just going to let it ride and see what happens, but it is worth noting it is still a little bit cloudy. My little quarantine tank down here still has a couple little baby guppies in there I threw in just so I've always got something alive in here. And then of course we've still got the two coolie loaches that are living in here, and they're more or less just permanent residents as well, so not a lot to talk about going on in that tank either. So we come in this video last, but certainly not least, we come to Butterbean's tank. This is another 40 breeder. This is a Brackish tank. I keep the specific gravity in this tank usually between 1.005 and 1.008. The figure 8 puffers and the bumblebee gobies both really need to be in low-end brackish water for maximum health. And then of course my the two sailfin mollies I have in here do just fine in brackish water, especially low-end brackish water. In fact, mollies will do better in brackish water than they do like in really soft freshwater. If you've got mollies, then it's always advisable, if you don't have hard water, then I would recommend putting a little salt in the tank, aquarium salt if necessary, but do something to put some dissolved solids and some mineralization in the water for your mollies. Your mollies do not do well in very soft water. They do fantastic in brackish water, just not really well in very soft water, as I found out the hard way over the years. So not really sure what that was all about. The molly in question there just kind of came out and put his tail in Butterbean's face, so Butterbean backed off and moved away, because he is really skittish. He lets, you know, mollies push him around. He lets the shrimp push him around in this tank. He lets the little gobies push him around. It's kind of weird to see this other molly just sitting on the rock back there. These two fish are usually so active, and now it almost looks like I've caught them at nap time. So nothing really to talk about with this tank. Butterbean is still doing okay. He still has those white marks on him. The ones that were there I don't think are ever going to go away. It looks like scarring at this point, but they're not getting worse. He doesn't, again, seem any worse for the wear. He doesn't act any different. His coloration is still good. He's usually got a nice bright white belly, especially when I come down first thing in the morning. You know, when I'm kind of annoying him like this, his belly might gray up a little bit. That is a sign that a puffer's stressed out. When their belly gets darker, they're more stressed. When it's bright white, they're nice and happy. And like I said, he's usually nice and bright white, so I'm not too concerned about it. No idea what those marks are, no idea what was causing them or where they came from. but they don't seem to be getting any worse, and they don't seem to be having any real significant impact on him. So I'm just going to do my best to stay on top of maintenance. We did do a water change this week. I wiped the glass down, and that was it. Didn't mess with the filter or anything else, but just did a simple little water change here. I'm actually beginning to get a little concerned about this molly. That's normal behavior for a molly. They will rest on the bottom like that and just sit there and not move when they're sleeping especially, but it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The other molly is swimming around just fine. I never see them not next to each other. They're always, you know, chasing each other around the tank, trying to mate with each other, despite the fact that they're 2 males. And yet now we've got this one that's acting fairly normal and moving around, but then this other one is just sitting back there on that rock and not moving, even with me right up here against it. I don't think mollies are capable of changing their gender over time. I know some fish can do that. If there's, you know, not the right conditions for breeding, one of the fish will change, you know, however is necessary. I don't believe mollies are capable of doing that. It almost seems as though she's back there sort of hiding from the male, and that's a female, but it's not. They're both males. So maybe something's not quite right with that fish. Maybe it's not doing right. It's moving. I can see its fins moving, so it's definitely still alive. It's not just a dead fish lying back there. But that is definitely interesting behavior. I'm going to have to keep my eye on that. Now watch, of course, next time I come in here, everything will be perfectly normal, and I'll never see it do this again. And it'll just be some sort of little anomaly, and that's fine too, because that happens fairly frequently in the fish keeping hobby. There's one of my little gobies. If you can see him sitting on the edge of that rock. A lot of people have wondered if they are not baby figure-8 puffers, and they are not. They are little bumblebee gobies. Very, very different type of fish than a puffer fish. But I've got 2 of those in the tank. I should have 3, but I only ever see 2 at a time, so I think one of them may have vanished over time. I've had them in here for a while now, so it's quite possible that I've lost one of them in the meantime. And there's the other one right there we can see on that rock. So there's one. Pretty good look at butterbean before we wrap the video up. And you can see what I was, excuse me, you can see what I was saying about the white marks he has on him. They're still very much there, but they don't seem to be getting worse, and they don't seem to be bothering him. They don't look infected or anything like that. They just look like scarring or something. So there you go, everybody. We're all the way around the world. As I said, we are going to talk about my waterfall tank here in another video. It'll get its own update altogether, but we will say goodbye by having one final look at it. Let the camera adjust to that much lighting for a moment. I've got new growth on everything. It's just growing in absolutely fantastic, so we'll talk about all that. I did a little bit of maintenance to it, so we'll talk about that. And if you've sat through all of this video, I'll give you the first look at that. I removed the front section of the rim, so we now have for all intents and purposes, a rimless waterfall tank. And I've also added a few new fish in there. We've been seeing more and more of the red-clawed crabs because I've got 3 crabs in the tank instead of 1 now, and so they move around a little more. I've moved some woodwork around. I've added some plants. You know, externally here, you can see my begonia rex over there. I've got you know, a couple other things I've added over here, so on and so forth. So, like I said, we'll do a whole video just talking about this waterfall tank by itself and in its own right, because it's worthy of, you know, 20 minutes of discussion just by itself. So, alright everybody, I'm going to leave you with this as your final view and say thanks for watching, and make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss anything I got coming up. Don't forget, this one here is my waterfall tank. Thanks again, and I'll see you real soon in the next one.